Channel. Guys, today we're gonna drink the old school root beer.
What?
You're at a family picnic, and someone hands a frosty mug of root beer to a 5-year-old. Nobody bats an eye. But if you really think about it, isn't that completely bizarre? We're giving kids a drink called beer. In any other country, that would cause a scandal. Parents would be arrested. But in America, it's as wholesome as apple pie. So how did the most family-friendly beverage in America end up with the most adult name possible? How did a drink that tastes like liquid candy become associated with something that gets you drunk? The answer takes us on a wild journey through Native American medicine, colonial experimentation, Victorian marketing genius, and one of the most chaotic periods in American history. This isn't just the story of how root beer got its name. It's the story of how America created its most uniquely American drink by accident, and why the rest of the world still doesn't understand what we're talking about when we say root beer. Let's go back to where it all began, long before there was an America to speak of. For centuries before European colonists arrived, Native American tribes across North America had been brewing medicinal drinks from the roots, bark, and leaves of native plants. The Ojibwe used birch bark. The Cherokee favored sassafras root. Dozens of tribes had their own recipes using wintergreen, sarsaparilla, ginger, and other local ingredients. These weren't recreational beverages. They were medicine. Sassafras root tea was believed to purify blood, cure rheumatism, and treat everything from fever to digestive problems. The drinks were often bitter, earthy, and acquired tastes that reflected their medicinal purposes. When European colonists encountered these root-based beverages in the 1600s and 1700s, something interesting happened. They were familiar with small beer, low-alcohol beverages that Europeans drank daily because they were safer than water. Small beer was made through fermentation, creating a slightly fizzy, mildly alcoholic drink that could be stored safely. The colonists saw these Native American root drinks and thought, "We can make this work." They began experimenting with local roots and bark, trying to recreate the familiar brewing processes they knew from Europe. They would boil roots, add molasses or sugar, and sometimes allow natural fermentation to occur. The key word here is brewing. Even when the final product contained little to no alcohol, the process involved brewing, boiling, steeping, and fermenting ingredients to create a fizzy, flavorful beverage. This brewing process is exactly why these drinks became known as beer, even when they weren't alcoholic. By the early 1800s, homemade root beer was common across rural America. Families had their own recipes passed down through generations. Some used sassafras exclusively. Others combined birch bark, wintergreen, ginger, and molasses. Still others experimented with sarsaparilla, giving birth to what would later become a separate drink entirely. These homemade versions often did contain small amounts of alcohol, not because anyone was trying to get drunk, but because natural fermentation was part of the preservation process. They were beer in the truest sense, fermented beverages with complex flavors and slight carbonation. But everything changed on a warm day in 1875, when a young Philadelphia pharmacist named Charles Hyers took a honeymoon trip that would alter American beverage history forever. Charles Hyers was on his honeymoon in New Jersey when he stopped at a rural inn and was served a delicious drink made from sassafras, ginger, and molasses. The innkeeper called it root tea, but Hyers was immediately struck by its commercial potential. As a pharmacist, he understood the medicinal properties people attributed to these ingredients. As a businessman, he saw opportunity. Hyers returned to Philadelphia obsessed with perfecting a commercial version of that root drink. He spent months experimenting with different combinations of sassafras, wintergreen, ginger, vanilla, and other roots and herbs. His goal wasn't just to recreate the taste. He wanted to create something that could be mass-produced and marketed. In 1876, Hyers introduced his creation at the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. He called it Hyers Root Beer, and his marketing was brilliant. He positioned it as a health drink that provided all the benefits of traditional root medicines in a delicious, refreshing package. His advertisements claimed it would purify the blood and make beautiful, clear complexions. But here's the genius part. Hyers deliberately called it beer. even though his version contained no alcohol. Why? Because he was marketing to a largely male audience that associated beer with refreshment and satisfaction. Calling it root tea sounded medicinal and feminine. Calling it root beer suggested something robust, satisfying, and familiar. The timing was perfect. America was industrializing rapidly, cities were growing, and people were looking for convenient, safe beverages they could buy rather than make at home. Hires root beer was marketed as wholesome, American, and healthy. Everything that alcohol wasn't. Hires root beer became a national phenomenon almost immediately. By 1880, he was selling over 100,000 bottles annually. By 1890, it was available across the country. Other companies rushed to create their own versions, and the American root beer industry was born. But the real explosion came with one of the most bizarre periods in American history: Prohibition. On January 16, 1920, the 18th Amendment took effect, banning the production, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages in America. Suddenly, a nation of beer drinkers needed alternatives. Root beer companies couldn't have asked for better timing. This is when root beer truly became America's drink. While speakeasies served illegal alcohol in dark basement rooms, soda fountains served root beer in brightly lit family establishments. Root beer represented everything Prohibition advocates wanted America to be: wholesome, family-friendly, and morally pure. Roy Allen understood this perfectly. In 1919, just 1 year before Prohibition began, he opened the first A&W root beer stand in Lodi, California. Allen had purchased a root beer recipe from a pharmacist and began selling mugs of the frothy beverage to thirsty workers. His timing was impeccable. During Prohibition, A&W exploded across America. Allen pioneered the drive-in restaurant concept, where customers could park their cars and have root beer delivered on trays that hooked to their car windows. By 1933, when Prohibition ended, there were over 170 A&W locations nationwide. The drive-in concept was revolutionary. Root beer became associated with America's emerging car culture, teenage social life, and the optimism of the Roaring '20s. Families would drive to A&W stands on weekend evenings. Teenagers would cruise by after school. Root beer floats, root beer poured over vanilla ice cream, became the ultimate American treat. Meanwhile, other companies were creating their own regional root beer empires. In 1898, Roy Allen had founded A&W, but dozens of other brands emerged during the Prohibition era. Dad's Root Beer launched in Chicago. Mug Root Beer started in San Francisco. IBC Root Beer began in St. Louis. Each claimed to have the original or best recipe. What's fascinating is how different these regional versions became. Barq's, founded in Louisiana, had a sharper bite and actually contained caffeine. Birch beer dominated Pennsylvania and the Northeast. Sarsaparilla ruled parts of the Southwest. But they were all called beer, and they all represented the same cultural phenomenon: America's alternative to alcohol. The soda fountain era cemented root beer's place in American culture. Between 1920 and 1950, nearly every American town had at least one soda fountain where families would gather for root beer floats, ice cream sodas, and conversation. These weren't just businesses. They were community centers where teenagers had first dates, families celebrated special occasions, and neighbors caught up on local news. Root beer became intertwined with American nostalgia before there was even anything to be nostalgic about. It represented an idealized vision of American life: wholesome, sweet, and innocent. Norman Rockwell could have painted it. Andy Griffith could have endorsed it. Even after Prohibition ended in 1933, root beer maintained its wholesome image. Other sodas like Coca-Cola and Pepsi became global brands, but root beer remained distinctly American. International visitors often found it bizarre, too sweet, too medicinal, too strange. But for Americans, that strangeness was exactly the point. Root beer represented something uniquely ours, in a way that Coke and Pepsi never could. It wasn't trying to conquer the world. It was content being America's weird, wonderful, inexplicable contribution to the beverage universe. Today, walk into any American grocery store and you'll find dozens of root beer varieties. Craft breweries make artisanal versions with exotic ingredients. Chain restaurants serve it in frosted mugs. Kids still get excited about root beer floats at birthday parties. But here's what's really remarkable. Root beer is still called beer, even though most Americans have completely forgotten why. The brewing process that gave it the name disappeared decades ago. Modern root beer is simply carbonated water mixed with artificial flavors and sweeteners. There's no brewing, no fermentation, no alcohol, and definitely no actual roots in most commercial versions. Yet the name persists because it's become part of American cultural DNA. Root beer isn't just a drink. It's a symbol of American ingenuity, our to take something foreign and make it completely our own. It represents our talent for marketing the wholesome while keeping just a hint of the rebellious. Food historian Sarah Lohman puts it this way: root beer embodies the American paradox. It's a beer that's safe for children, a natural drink made with artificial flavors, a traditional beverage that's constantly evolving. It makes no sense, which makes it perfectly American. Ask any American about their first root beer float, and you'll get stories. Summer afternoons at A&W, birthday parties with frosted mugs, road trips with dad's root beer from gas station coolers. These aren't just beverage memories, they're childhood memories, family memories, American memories. The persistence of root beer in American culture says something profound about how we understand tradition and innovation. We kept the name beer, not because it made logical sense, but because it felt right. It honored the drink's complex history while acknowledging its completely transformed present. So why is root beer called beer? Because in the 1600s, colonists brewed drinks from Native American roots using European techniques. Because in 1876, a pharmacist thought beer sounded more appealing than tea. Because during Prohibition, Americans needed something that felt familiar while being completely safe. Because for over 200 years, we've been too stubborn to change a name that stopped making sense decades ago. Root beer is called beer because it's the most American thing imaginable, a drink that makes no sense to anyone else but perfect sense to us. It's our delicious, fizzy, completely illogical contribution to world cuisine. And honestly, we wouldn't have it any other way.